Welcome everybody and happy second day of Black History Month. This made me think that so my son is taking the new Black History course, so I feel like at the end of the year we should force some kids to come here and tell us about their experience taking that course.
I think they'd love it.
I'd love to. Yeah, I know they haven't done it yet, but he's like, and we get to go on field trips. I'm like, oh, it's pretty cool. Okay, so we are going to call this meeting to order, and our first item is to adopt the meeting minutes from our January meeting. Do I have a motion to adopt January's meeting minutes? A second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
And then this is our agenda, so we'll start with that public comment if there's any. We'll turn it over to David for any board member comments. We'll ask Dr. Harris for just any updates on the anti-racism regulation. If we get one more voting member, we'll be voting on bylaws updates. If not, we'll have to hold that off until next month. And then we'll kind of talk about budget. Scott's going to lead us in a brief discussion around the reconsideration committee. And then we'll talk a little bit about a spring community follow-up forum to last year's forum that we're hoping to host in the spring. We'll end with SOCA updates, subcommittee updates, and just action items from the meeting. So do I have a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting? A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so do we have any public comments? Sorry.
No pressure.
So I'll turn it over to David for board member comments.
I wanted to turn again to that we're in budget season. My biggest priorities in this budget remain special education, and that special education funding that's in the budget stay fully funded. But if there are areas that this committee wants to advocate on, I think that that's really important, and I think that the board has been responsive to public comment from the Racial Equity Committee on other issues, including on the anti-racism policy. So I think that this coming Wednesday, February 8th, would be an important time to be at the board meeting if there is going to be advocacy on adding anything to the budget at this time. That's my main point that I wanted to make. Are there any questions for me? Okay, thank you.
And Dr. Harris,
Right.
just an update for the committee. I know you kind of told us, but.
Okay, all right. And so, at this point, superintendent's cabinet is still working through next steps with the policy, examining existing regulations that correspond to the policy, and then also taking a look at some structures that are in place that needs to be updated and all of those things. And so we anticipate that we'll be ready for public comment on the product of what's produced later on in the school year, later on in the spring.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? It sounds like you're about to say.
Dr. Harris, what will be the best ways for people to give feedback on the regulations?
So I know we're talking about it on Monday again, but I think what we're going to be doing is hosting some sort of community forum to examine, here's what we have as a result of policy, here are the different components, now give us feedback. So it likely will be something along those lines.
And those would be open to the whole community, is that right? Or
not determined yet whether or not it's the whole community, whether or not it is stakeholder groups in the community, so that's still yet to be determined.
I'm sure other folks on this committee have conveyed this, but whatever can be done to ensure that Racial Equity Committee has opportunity to give feedback on the regulations, I think will be really important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And adding on to what David asked, Dr. Harris, is there going to be I know you said different subgroups might be able to have an opportunity. Would the different committees of the board be able to have a subgroup in and of our own to give our own comments back or our own feedback, or has
To
that?
be determined.
Okay.
Yeah, not determined yet. But I will bring these comments into our superintendent's cabinet discussion.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so we're gonna bypass this for now unless we get one more member to join us. Otherwise, we'll hold that off till next meeting.
No.
What was that?
Did I say to?
Yeah, I think you already said what we were gonna say in
Yeah.
this part. Yeah, that basically that the board is now, everyone's discussing budget, so it might be a good opportunity for us to go ahead and advocate for various things that we might look forward to as a committee relating to some of our goals and our goals for our students who have been historically marginalized within the community. But yeah, David.
I mean, I will add to that. And so there was the budget hearing yesterday, and I had to work my other job. But my understanding, one proposal that came forward from Dawn Lynch is that some of the English learning programs, the EL programs, to be more in student schools rather than centralized, that have more of the programs so people can stay in their neighborhood schools. I mean, on the whole, I'm supportive of that. And so, that would be one thing that came forward yesterday that potentially the Racial Equity Committee might want to speak on.
And I know in the past, we've also talked about the availability of interpreters and interpreted material throughout the district. I don't know if we still have energy around stuff like that in particular, but that also could be something that we could resurface as we have talked about it in years past. Did anyone have any other thoughts?
Lucas.
Oh, go ahead, Lucas.
Thank you. So yeah, I was at the budget hearing yesterday as well, and
Hold on one second.
One
Lucas.
second, we're gonna turn up the volume.
Okay.
All right, let's try again.
can you hear me?
It's a little loud.
Yes.
It's a little better.
Okay. So yeah, I was at the budget hearing as well, and another point that I thought was important was that somebody mentioned that classes should be offered equally throughout schools. And for example, with the African American history class, that isn't offered at every school, and some students weren't able to take that. So that's another point, that those classes should be offered equally throughout schools.
Anyone else want to have any comments about budget items we might want to advocate for?
I have a follow-up question to what Lucas just said. Can you unpack a little bit as to why it's not at each school? I don't know.
It's likely a function of the number of students who signed up for the course, not reaching a sufficient number to assign a teacher. I will say that it is being offered in the Frederick County Virtual School to ensure that there is access for students in every single school.
Tia?
Hey, good evening. So I don't know that this is necessarily a topic that we're ready to comment on, but just kind of putting it out there. One of the things that we talked about as part of the anti-racism policy is, additional funds for training to help them be able to address culturally sensitive materials in the classroom. So again, I know we're still going through the process of adopting that policy and enacting regulations around it, but I just wanted to bring that up because I know as a committee or as a subcommittee, we talked about, needing additional training in that area, and that would, require additional funds.
That's a great point. And I guess in general, like, I think when we were even like drafting the anti-racism policy, the idea that there, like some of those items would require funds. So it's like, would this be an appropriate time to kind of speak to that? Or I don't know how that works. Or maybe there's always.
I would say yes. I mean, while it's tempting or good to wait for the regulation to be developed, but then it would be the next budget cycle. So I would say yes to start the conversation.
Yeah. So it sounds like we have several points, so it might be worthwhile if someone can attend. Yeah. So we'll kind of follow up after, and if anyone will volunteer now, fine. But we can sort of work on drafting a public comment. And yeah.
Sounds good.
Anything else we'd want to include in that?
And back to the African American Studies class, if it's offered at FCPS's virtual school, am I allowed to take it as a student at, let's say, Catoctin? Is that allowed? How does that work?
I'm not sure.
So if there's not a sufficient number of students at one school to take it and not a sufficient number at another school, can they join virtually
Correct.
to be able to take it? I thought some of those efforts were being made. So I don't have the
I
definite
don't either.
facts on that, but I do know that there were some of those efforts made. So I don't know if that's the case right now, but I know that that was a topic of conversation.
Okay.
So something we can find out.
Yeah, and then I think we can sort of work on drafting something as a committee, and if there's other points that people think of after the meeting, we can add that in as well. And then I'm going to turn it over to Scott to talk to us a little bit about the reconsideration committee.
Okay. There were some find out first messages. There was some media coverage. There's also an announcement on the front page of the FCPS website. But just in case, a little bit of background. That going back, I think it's as far as 1993. There's been a long-standing regulation in FCPS that anyone from the community, a parent, student, community member, can essentially challenge an instructional material that's being used in the classroom, whether that's a novel in English class, a periodical that may be being used, or in this case, library books. So it's been a long-standing regulation that's been in place here and in most districts across the country. I think the last one that occurred in FCPS was over 5 years ago. It may even be closer to 7 or 8. But as you may have seen in the fall, we received a formal reconsideration request for 35 library books that are currently on our shelves in middle and high schools, based on some concerns from a community member about various themes that is part of the challenge of these books. Each of the books are listed on the website. So if you go to the FCPS website, scroll down, there's a box on the front page that says update on reconsideration committee, and the list of books is there. But at this point, our job in FCPS is to facilitate a process that's governed by the regulation, which includes convening a committee of subject matter experts, of staff, of teachers, of parents. A committee has been convened so that there is representation from every feeder. There was so much interest from the community that parents and students were randomly selected to ensure equitable opportunities to be a part of the committee. We were planning on the first meeting taking place in January, but you might have seen a complaint filed by the Frederick News Post regarding the Open Meetings Act in Maryland. The reconsideration committees have historically really been staff-led internal deliberations that happen within the district, typically have not been open to the public historically, to allow the committee, the staff. There are students on this committee, by the way, high school students, high school seniors, to allow the committee to do its work. That's been the historical practice with these reconsideration committees. The Credit News Post challenged that, and that is now under review by a state board who rules on complaints regarding the Open Meeting Act. So we are just basically on hold until that body makes a decision about whether the meetings will be open to the public or not. And then the committee will meet. Once the committee begins meeting, it's fairly unprecedented to have 35 books simultaneously. Typically, it's one at a time, where the entire committee would read the one book, and the entire committee would deliberate on that one book. This is going to be a little bit of a different process because there are so many books, so the committee is much larger than has been historically done. And we'll go through a series of smaller subcommittees reading the books and making recommendations to the larger committee, who will then deliberate. Although it still needs to be decided whether the meetings themselves will be open, this is always a really transparent process, with the topics of the committee's discussions being written into a report, with the final recommendation being written into a report that is all posted publicly once the process is over. With so many books, it's going to take a little time, but we do intend to get through it before the end of the school year. A lot of that is posted on the website. There's an FAQ, the list of books. And as we launch the first meeting and begin the actual process, updates will be continued to be posted publicly on that FAQ.
Are the books like pulled for now? Are they available? Like, what's the status of the books while the process is happening?
Part of the process is the books stay on the shelves while the process is underway. Keep in mind that this regulation and this process is also governed by litigation, Supreme Court rulings that really over the years have had opinions on, for example, keeping books in circulation while a challenge is underway. So there is a lot of legal precedent, and not only regulation, but legal precedent for how these processes are set up.
I don't know if you would know this, but do you think other Maryland counties have very similar policy and regulation around this, or would it really vary by county?
This policy or regulation to govern reconsideration when a book is challenged is pretty common in districts across the country. In fact, I recently came from Montgomery County in a similar position and had a similar regulation, and I had similar responsibility for seeing the process through in a very similar way.
Thank you.
Thank you for that summary. I know there's a lot of information, but sometimes it's easier to hear it verbally. So it's a sick place. So thank you. Okay. And next, we just wanted to talk a little bit about a kind of follow-up community forum to the forum we had last March. I know when we met with community members last March, we really said that this would be sort of like a continued discussion, not just like a one-time thing that's done, and we sort of wanted to make sure we were holding ourselves and FCPS more generally kind of accountable to sort of some of the things we talked about and transparency and that sort of thing. So we thought that this would be a good time for kind of a follow-up community forum. Last March when we did it, it was literally us like sitting there and listening to the community members talk the entire time. But we know that one theme that really came out through that was that like community frustration, that sort of these discussions happen in the moment, everyone's like really charged, and then it feels like nothing happens or like the outcome of that's not clear. And we thought that, and so we've talked to Dr. Harris a little bit at the starting stages, but kind of thinking about a way to collaboratively do a community forum where we would start with like some sort of like presentation from the school system of like, here's some of the things we've done over the past year to address, these themes, and then having a section where, you know, there can be public comment, but really just making sure that we have a part where we're providing updates and information, and how sort of how we've really evolved over the last year. So that was kind of the overarching concept, but just wanted to have a kind of a broader discussion with the full committee if folks had ideas or questions or comments or anything related to how we might structure that.
So I think one of the biggest questions that we kind of wanted to talk about was, what exactly do we think the community would want to hear from the school system first when they come in and frame the community forum? What do we feel our folks, our community would want to hear about? Like, could we create a list of items or like objectives, if you will, of things our community would want to hear? I know, you know, obviously most recently there's been a huge talk about data. How is data collected about bullying, racism in schools, things like that. I don't know if that's a route we want to go. I know that has been a topic that has had a lot of energy within our own committee. But do we have, now would be our time where we could kind of sit and brainstorm as to what we want that to look like and what we believe people would want to hear more about.
Would it be possible to even put a call out to see and try to find if there's themes that the community wants? I know that could be a lot of work to go through and find out all those themes, and I will volunteer to do so since I'm putting this out there. But I think it really offers them an opportunity to guide this and puts our best foot forward and really centering their needs and wants. And again, I will volunteer to go through all the data.
Oh, that's gonna be in the notes, Sarah. All in the notes. We heard you volunteer twice, not once previous, but twice.
I will suffer the consequences.
You will have support. We'll be here to help.
Yes. We'll leave you alone. Is there anything from our particular committee that we believe is important to hear from the school system?
I think the data and transparency would be a good one, and I think maybe the next month or whenever we meet that committee, because I think it was a great starting point, the discussion we had last month, but that was, I think, a more narrow, you know, focus on that specific, like the bullying data, and I think from the community, like there was sort of an interest in sort of understanding holistically, like what is the data, you know, what are we learning? So I think that you've said that, but I'm just reiterating that I think that would be a really important part of that, to understand how it's tracked in the transparency.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is like maybe the school system can present strategies that they're using for transparency purposes within the community, and a description of how data is being collected on racism. And I know before when I spoke, I said bullying, but what I really mean is racism. I just say the bullying because it's in the form.
Other ideas, folks on the phone? And virtual.
And are there funds for interpretation?
Did we have, I mean, it shouldn't matter, but I am curious, did we have interpreters a year ago?
I don't think so. That was yeah, this one's more planned out. That one, I think, happened in a really condensed fashion. So
Yeah. I cannot identify the budget line, and yet we will push for this. And yes, I certainly think there can and should be, or can and will be, interpreters there.
In the past, we've asked if someone needs an interpreter, let us know, so that it can be a focused need, if people we know are coming, rather than just.
Let me just, is that acceptable to the committee that folks have to request the
I
interpreter?
wouldn't do it.
Yeah,
I wouldn't do it because this is all about equity.
Yeah.
And just because somebody doesn't ask for one, doesn't mean that there's not someone in the audience that needs one. And because we are the race of equity, we're doing it, we need to make sure we have interpreters.
The only concern I have is I think we would secure we would hire a Spanish interpreter, and I guess it's unlikely we would proactively hire an interpreter of any other language, I
And that
think.
would be sign language,
Um,
right? Deaf and hard of hearing.
Ah,
yeah,
Deaf and hard
so
of hearing.
typically we would have sign language interpreters as well as Spanish interpreters, because that's the dominant language other than English in FCPS. And you would have 2 of each there. You have to have 2 of each for sign language interpreting. That's a expectation and a mandate based on their rules and stuff. They can only sign for so long before they switch off. And then that has been best practice for the Spanish interpreters as well.
yeah, Dr. Harris, I'd love to work with you on this, especially once we have a date, but yeah, thank you for raising that.
Okay.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Would we consider maybe having a couple of students be a part of this? Maybe some students from SOCA to be a part of the presentation portion of the forum, excuse me, or answering questions, or both?
I feel like we can, SOCA has a meeting coming up, so I can work with Ms. Early and bring that up to them and see if that's something that they would like to do. I think that's a great idea, Tyrese.
Okay.
Include that student voice data.
Thank you.
RT?
Yeah, so I think just going back to what we were discussing previously about the textbooks, the books in the libraries that are currently being reconsidered, I think maybe, I know I've heard some questions from local parents. How are the books that are currently in our libraries being chosen? And then just to take it one step further, I'm just thinking about everything that's taking place currently in Florida. Maybe having some discussion points around, or just some information on how the curriculum within FCPS is being chosen, obviously from elementary up to high school. I think just shedding some light on these topics that are just, they're so frequently in the media right now, especially with the textbooks locally, and then obviously with everything that's taking place, discussions around the curriculum in Florida. So I think just some insight from the schools around how we're selecting would be good information for the community.
Any other thoughts right now? It's a great start. And I think if other folks have ideas that come up, we definitely want to hear it. If there are individuals who would like to help with planning, like more directly, please let us know that as well, because I think that's helpful. And then I think we'll be working closely with Dr. Harris to kind of work on a structure that's gonna, I think, be meaningful for everybody involved. I think we're looking, is it April now that we're looking, or because I think the March dates aren't great, or are we still up in there?
We have one available still March date, but based upon, April will probably be better. Yes, toward the end of April are the dates that had auditoriums available.
Yeah, so we'll definitely follow up with next steps, especially when we have a date, and anyone who's, like I said, interested, we definitely want to get involved. And Ivani, I don't know what she said yes to, but other people can see comments.
There was just a question if all of the comments were heard. So I was just responding that yes, we heard all the comments.
Got it.
Is it, do you think we would, and I don't know if you want to discuss this whole committee, but do you think we would have this community forum in place of an April racial equity committee meeting, or in addition to, Or do you guys think that's to be decided later?
I think that might be in place of the April meeting, especially because the beginning of April is spring break, and I think it would be a busy month to do. Do others agree? I wanna make sure.
So really quickly, we have a quick Students of Color Alliance SOCA update. Thanks, Ivania. We were awarded a grant through the Teachers Union that was written by Dawn Lynch, our secretary, which is amazing. We just hosted a movie night. I think it was already a couple weeks ago. And it was great. We saw Just Mercy. It was fantastic discussion that was facilitated by Pasayo, our president of SOCA. She did a phenomenal job. Her and Zoe were facilitating those discussions, and it really got the community involved with their thoughts on the movie and how race and equity play out in the movie. Currently, we're talking a little bit about going to the MSP Minority Scholars Retreat down in Montgomery County, March 18th at Northwest High School. We're still working out logistics and trying to get as many students possible to go who do want to go. We're additionally looking into hosting in sometime March or April. It will most likely not be March 4th as it's posted up there, but in March or April, another development day for the kiddos in SOCA to just develop their own knowledge on how to lead a student-led, student-run organization. And we will keep everyone in here updated on that date once it gets confirmed, but it will most likely not be March 4th now. Are there any questions? And then really quickly, with subcommittee updates, I know several of our subcommittees had the opportunity to meet over the last few weeks in small groups, and now's going to be the opportunity for us to kind of sit and give some quick updates with regard to each subcommittee. So we're going to go ahead and I'll start off. Our particular subcommittee is the culturally sensitive and inclusive curriculum and instruction subcommittee. Actually, you know what? I'm going to turn it over to Tia. Tia, can you hear me? I know she was driving. Okay, I'll go ahead. So we talked a little bit about Black History Month and how Black History Month is approached in FCPS. We're now in the process of looking over resources that teachers use to teach about Black History Month, the lessons that teachers are given to teach during Black History Month. We also had some energy around the Reconsideration Committee, and Scott gave us some more information on that. So basically for the next few weeks until we meet, we're going to come back and kind of look at and see how we can elevate Black History Month and other months of racial cultural celebrations here in FCPS.
Hey, Elisa, I'm sorry. I was trying to unmute myself, but it was not working. So
Okay.
I am here.
It's okay. Did you want to add anything, Tia?
Yeah, definitely. So just to add to that summary, I think one of the important things that also came out of our discussion was kind of a recognition that, there are sort of 3 tiers to what it is we're trying to ultimately achieve. And that, is sort of the policy, right? We were created as a committee to make suggested changes to policy. But then there's the regulation, right? That's going to be a little more specific. And then there's the implementation, which really happens on the ground. And so we had some really good conversation around, how do we as a committee influence, what's happening at the regulation and even at the implementation level as a way of, ensuring that the goals of the committee are met, with the idea of anti-racism and being able to really affect what's happening at the schools.
I think school data and school learners already had a chance to meet, but yeah. So I'm on the school climate discipline, data and extracurricular activities subcommittee. A small group of us met last week, I think. And I think we're kind of doing twofold because we have several like new members on that committee, just kind of looking at that initial list of like policies that are related to these activities, just to see if there's anything that's timely that we would want to sort of speak to. But also, I think given our discussion about data at last month's meeting, there were definitely a lot of follow-up questions. So really trying to think about some of the follow-up questions we have for to ask you, Dr. Harrison.
Yeah.
And
Is
crew.
Jen Bankman on that subcommittee?
I don't remember. No, I don't know. I have to double check. She might be on the other, like the school data, which is the academic data committee. I'm not sure. Yeah. I don't think she's on our committee actually.
Okay.
But if we think, like I said, there was some switching, so if it seems like that, it might be valuable to have her. She has the bandwidth for it, so I might reach out to her to see.
Yeah, I think it would be great to reach out to her because she would have a great lens on school data and how it's collected and all of those things.
Yeah, so I think that'll be a nice, like, I think we'll try to also reconvene in the coming weeks and with a focus on data and what are kind of some of our questions that we would like answered, just to kind of continue that conversation going as well. And Ivania, Cyrus, do you guys have anything to add? It was a pretty short meeting, but.
I think you covered it. Thank you.
Alrighty, and then the hiring committee.
After that, you want to put that in. Chair Ballard, do two things.
Oh, right. That is true. I don't have my notes. I wasn't prepared. We had a meeting with our subcommittee regarding retention, recruitment and retention, hiring and retention. So we had some new members, so we were kind of just bringing folks up to speed. And in terms of what we've done, I was able to share with them some data that I had received around staffing and where we were. So we're using that to start. And we have a number of things that we've already been working on. So we're just going to try to, shift through them and prioritize them and continue to work. We have a lot of great energy on our subcommittee. I'm really excited to get to work with these folks.
Yes, the hiring committee has been our best performing committee consistently. So you guys get a star. So that just means all the other subcommittees, we have to work hard to match their energy.
Yes.
Yes. No pressure.
We will change that.
Well, now that
That's what I'm trying to. Our energy to go up.
Gonna roll up in a minute.
Absolutely.
And we're gonna keep it that way. That's my fault.
There's not talking about the competitive. I see
It's a
you.
safe.
I see you. Just wait till next time. All the things.
So I think that's everything. So I think our next meeting is March 1st. I think if folks have a chance to reconvene with their subcommittee, it seems like there's energy in the various committees to take on some subtasks. That'd be great. Like I said, anyone who's interested in sort of getting more directly involved in planning for the community forum, please reach out. Ivania, I know you commented you'd like to be involved, and Sarah too, since she's gonna be, so if anyone else,
And
definitely
David.
let us know. And David, yeah. So we'll be working on that. And I feel like there's one more thing that I can't remember.
The biggest thing was if we are able to get, do that community forum in April, which is our hope, that April 5th meeting date would then become the community forum date.
But it's probably gonna be a different date. Yeah, but that'll replace something good. Any questions or comments before we wrap up?
And really, if everyone can please mark on their calendars March 1st as our next meeting. We'd love to have quorum so that we can finally get our bylaws that have already been revised by us passed.
Yes. And also in March, we're gonna start talking, elections are gonna be in May. So we definitely wanna hear from folks who are interested in nominating either themselves or someone else for a exec board position, either chair, co-chair, or secretary. And if anyone has any questions about what that entails, reach out to any of us and we're happy to chat. we will adjourn.